What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So it is finally the week of the college football playoff, and I could not be any more excited to get into these games, do a full in-depth breakdown on all the playoff matchups. And in this case, this video will be focusing on the Georgia versus Michigan game in the Orange Bowl, way down in Miami, 7:30 p.m. this Friday on New Year's Eve. So, a few weeks back, I did a quick overview and initial thoughts video on, both of the playoff matchups with Georgia, Michigan, and Alabama, Cincinnati. Didn't go into too much detail, just kind of talked about what I'm looking for, what I might see. I didn't leave a score prediction or anything like that. And it was, it's 2 weeks old. There's been more news to come out since then, and it wasn't my full breakdown. It was just, like I said, an initial broad overview. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to go back, watch that if you want more of a broad overview and an initial reaction and just some more commentary from me on these games. But this video will be a little bit more detailed analysis of the game, matchup by matchup, explore what I think will happen, what each team is going to try to do. And at the end, I'll give a score prediction on the game. And also, let's just go ahead and get right into it. So, I will start with the Michigan defense against the Georgia offense and how that matches up. Let's begin with what the Michigan defense is really good at and how that will apply to Georgia. So by far the strength of the Michigan defense is just how good they are with their pass rush. Their pass rush, led by Aiden Hutchinson, is elite. And he is by no means the only pass rusher on the team. Ojabo is another elite level pass rusher. And even beyond those two, there are even more very good, effective, decent pass rushers, especially because now they get to rush beside those guys, besides Hutchinson and Ojabo. And so they get very favorable one-on-one matchups that are schemed up nice just for them. And the opposing offense is going to try to put their best blocker on Hutchinson and Ojabo. They're going to try to chip to them. They're going to focus specifically on blocking them. And it allows a lesser pass rusher, if you will, to get a much more favorable matchup and to fare much better in the pass rush. And so that really works out well for them. It is by far the strength of their defense and honestly of their team in a lot of ways. But because of that, Michigan has very high success getting to the quarterback. Obviously, that's what your pass rush does. But they even have higher success when they blitz because they already have these favorable one-on-ones, right? And if you're going to commit people to doubling Aiden Hutchinson or chipping a tight end on or something like that, and Michigan blitzes, now they have even more guys for you to try to pick up. You're not going to be able to pick them all up to begin with. Now, even if you do pick them up, you're going to have a running back trying to block someone one-on-one, or most of the time you probably just won't be able to pick the blocks up at all. And even if you do, like I said, you're going to have very unfavorable matchups. And so their blitzes tend to work very well just because of how good they are at rushing the passer with just 4 or 5. Because of that, though, that's not normally how they choose to attack an offense. They don't blitz all that much. Not to say that they don't blitz at all, but they tend to sort of let their 4 and 5 guys get home up front without, blitzing a lot of guys, because when you just rush the 4 and 5 and they can still get home with the 4 and 5 guys, especially with a guy like an Aiden Hutchinson, it allows you to drop 6 or 7 guys into pass coverage out of like a base defense look, not out of like a dime look or something like that. Out of a base defense, you can drop 6 or 7 guys into coverage. You can do some pretty interesting things with them in the scheme with disguising zones and delayed blitzes and things like that. And that causes absolute just so many issues for opposing passing games, because now you have this good pass rush coming at you with only 4 and 5, but also you're not going to have an immediate opening downfield. You're not going to have somebody come open clear. You're not going to have a wide open throw, at least most of the time, because they're going to have numbers in the passing game in the secondary, because they're going to be able to drop 7 guys out in the coverage, and it puts your offense in a really, really tough situation. So Michigan is uniquely equipped to defeat teams who rely heavily on a passing game, particularly if you rely on an explosive throw down the field, because they hold up well enough in coverage to force great, and I mean like great elite level NFL caliber throws from the opposing quarterback, which is already incredibly hard to do. But then you couple that with, you have to make these throws with this elite level pass rush in your face. It gets even harder to do. You even high level quarterbacks, honestly, even NFL quarterbacks aren't going to make those throws all the time. And most college quarterbacks, like 95% or more college quarterbacks, aren't going to consistently be able to make a throw with an elite pass rush in your face into tight windows downfield when they're able to drop 6 and 7 into coverage like that consistently. And really, they can drop 8 a lot too, which they will do if they get into a situation where they just really want to. But they can, I mean, 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, just drop 7 like no big deal instead of worrying about trying to generate blitz packages. And that really tears up an offense. They don't give teams time to throw the ball downfield. They play sound coverage with a pretty even mix of man and zone. They'll run a lot of man-zone concepts together, little combo coverages, and that requires really good throws from your quarterback if you run man and if you run sound zone coverage. Now, sometimes you'll just find little holes in the zone, but they tend to take a little bit longer to develop, and you don't normally have time with this pass rush. The point is that even with elite level quarterback play, passing on Michigan is an insanely hard ask. And regardless of who Georgia plays at quarterback, JT Daniels or Stetson Bennett, I don't think it's fair to say that they are elite level quarterback, not like Bryce Young level quarterback play, not even really CJ Stroud level quarterback play, who Michigan already played earlier this year. And Georgia certainly doesn't have the receiving core that Ohio State had. And you saw how good Michigan was against them defensively. And, yeah, it's just you're not going to be able to throw on them very well. It's just not going to happen because of, A, their scheme, but really just when you have an elite pass rush like that can get home with 4, it opens up so much for your defense. It gives you so many options, and it just naturally makes things so difficult on an offense. And especially if your explosive plays aren't like, you throw a slant and then the receiver takes it 80 yards run after catch. If your explosive plays are actually downfield throws that take time for your receivers to get down the field, good luck, man. I mean, good luck against Michigan. You're not going to hit them probably at all, but at least you're not going to hit them very often on them. And they are absolutely outstanding at preventing that exact thing. And you can easily see this in the Ohio State game. They struggled mightily to block Michigan's pass rush, and their offense frequently stalled out as C.J. Stroud was forced to be nearly perfect. And another thing that the Michigan defense is great at is limiting points in the red zone. It's almost a bend but don't break mentality of sorts. And you see this also very heavily in the Ohio State game. And yes, while compared to an average defense, the Michigan defense doesn't really even bend all that much, just to be honest. But against Ohio State in particular, they allowed them to move the ball at a fairly effective rate between the 20s, which is a trademark of the RPO offense in general. You'll see that even if it's an offense that's struggling to put up good points, they will move the ball very well between the 20s. Just modern offenses like that, you're not going to just completely stonewall them. But the problem is that once they get down into the red zone and the field condenses a little bit, Michigan was holding them to field goals left and right. They were forcing turnover on downs. They were sometimes sacking them, putting them out of field goal range, causing them to have to punt even after crossing the 50, and that can have an absolutely profound impact on a game. That goes from, a 7-point swing to a 3-point swing or a 0-point swing, and that momentum carries over to your offense. Your points then essentially count for more because while, yes, Ohio State, for example, was moving well down the field, you knew pretty comfortably that they weren't going to consistently score even once they got into the red zone. It does so much just for the mindset, but also just for on-field. Any drive that you get down against another elite level team, any drive that you get down into the red zone, you really need to pull 7 points out of. And Michigan is outstanding at cutting those down to 3s and cutting them down to 0s even. And it's another aspect, and I think it's the second of the 2 big aspects for Michigan defensively in this game to watch. It's A, their pass rush is absolutely elite, and then B, they are great with the bend don't break almost type, where you can move the ball some, but you're going to struggle to turn that into points consistently. And again, that is more indicative also with an RPO offense. You will see that more often that an Ohio State runs, more than what you'll see with Georgia with more of the pro-style offense that they run. But I think you should credit Michigan's defense more than discredit Ohio State's offense. I feel like we've seen Ohio State's offense is pretty freaking elite at that point. And so regardless of who the Michigan defense is playing, I feel like you just need to know that that is a trait of the Michigan defense. It needs to be commended, and I feel like it can definitely rear its head in this game, which is because Georgia has a team that is very, very efficient at moving the ball. When it comes to yardage, yards per play, yards per pass, yards per rush, Georgia is elite. They're very, very good offensively. The problem is they don't hit hardly any big-time explosives, and that makes it much more difficult to turn yards into points. And what I mean by that is, for Georgia to go 75 yards down the field, they almost always need 5 to 8 plays or even more. Even with a guy like Brock Bowers having a good game, if you're hitting him for 15, 20 yards a pop, that's still 5-ish plays to get down the field to score a touchdown there. And that's 5 plays that you need to scheme up, execute well, and hope the defense doesn't just outplay you on it. Meanwhile, you look at like a Jamison Williams for Alabama, you can stop them for most of the game, but he'll beat you deep twice, and they have 14 immediately. Versus Georgia can be beating you for most of the game, but if you just stop them in a few critical moments, that can completely stall out the points that they're going to get because of explosives. And you saw it so much against Alabama because Georgia had multiple trips offense that crossed the 50 that ended in 0 points with a turnover on downs or an interception in the red zone. Sometimes they even ended in 3 points. And that right there is a huge momentum swing. When Georgia drives down the field, only gets 3 or gets 0. Meanwhile, Alabama doesn't drive down the field. They just hit one play, big touchdown, boom. That is a huge momentum swing, huge killer for good teams there, and that is a huge struggle that Georgia has. And you couple Georgia's struggle there with how good Michigan is defensively at it, and I think that's a real point to watch, is that Georgia, while they are incredibly efficient, you can very easily see them outgain Michigan and be more efficient with their yardage than Michigan, and yet still score less and fail to turn those yards into points. And I think that can really sway the outcome of the game. Now, as far as the Michigan secondary is concerned, I feel that the pass coverage for Michigan will be fine. It's not going to be dominant. I don't think they're just going to lock up the Georgia receiving corps by any means. But they're not going to get burnt either. Georgia's not going to come out there and just burn Michigan's secondary. It's not like Michigan has a bad secondary. I think Michigan has a very good secondary. And they're going to do fine, And I say mainly because I feel the corners and receivers are pretty evenly matched. Michigan has very high-level safety play as well, so it's not like you're going to get really easy, favorable matchups on their safeties either. Now, if George Pickens comes back and is 100%, I say comes back, he's already come back, but if he's 100% in this game, that could change things because 100% George Pickens, I feel like, is a top 3 wide receiver in America. I don't think he will be 100%. Honestly, though, even 80%, he could change the game just to some extent. But in this game in particular, I don't expect him to just come out and dominate the game simply due to the health issues. I mean, he tore his ACL earlier this year. It's kind of hard to just expect him to come out and be dominant in a playoff setting like that. Now, I think he'll likely make 1 or 2 big plays, especially downfield, and he could very well still be Georgia's best wide receiver in this game, but I don't think he's going to dominate in the secondary, and I think Michigan has good enough secondary play. They're very disciplined in the secondary, very well coached in the secondary, and it's not like you're going to run into a lot of size mismatches. Michigan has very big safeties in particular, but their corners are also, they're SEC size, if you will. I hate that sort of like, oh, the SEC guys are just way bigger, stronger, faster all the time. It's not true. But anyway, I digress. I think they're going to be fine. I don't think George Pickens is kind of going to come out and have a Devontae Smith type game that just, absolutely takes over the game. I don't think you're going to see it, and you're certainly not going to see that from like a Ladd McConkey or Jermaine Burton or something either. So I think the secondary for Michigan will hold up fine. Like I said, not going to be dominant, but it'll do okay. Brock Bowers is, in my opinion, the best tight end in America, but you can't just run an offense through a tight end. As much as I love tight ends, and I love Brock Bowers, and I love what Georgia does with them, it goes back to the same thing I was talking about earlier with the explosives. Jameson Williams gets open one time, scores a touchdown. Brock Bowers has to get open 5 or 6 times to take you all the way down to a touchdown. Bowers, fast, very fast tight end, very fast for his size. He's not going to outrun Michigan's corners. I mean, he can do it against a UAB or a Charleston Southern or something. He's not going to go up against a playoff caliber team and outrun their secondary. It's not going to happen. He's going to get open. He's going to make catches. He's going to make big plays, but he's not going to run a 50-yard, take a slant or an out route or something like that and turn it into a 50, 60-yard touchdown against a playoff level defense. That's not what he is. He's a tight end, and he's great at what he does, but you don't want to run your entire offense through a tight end. He's a great asset. Use him for sure, but I don't think he's going to be a game breaker by any means either. And so partially due to Michigan and partially due to Georgia, I feel like the Georgia passing game will be effective, but not something that Georgia is going to solely rely on to score them points. They're not going to want to come out and be pass heavy by any means. It's not going to fit their game plan at all. It's not what Georgia does in any situation really. Even if it is an effective option for them, I don't think it's going to be deficient by any means. Like, I don't think Michigan's going to just stonewall the Georgia passing game, but I don't think the Georgia passing game is just going to come out and light up Michigan either. I think that is sort of a ridiculous thing to think about. But anyway, so now let's look at something that I feel could be a downside for the Michigan defense. And to me, and I know I'm going to get Michigan fans hating on me for this, I already know it. Before you do that, just wait, hear me out. I think it's the Michigan run defense. And again, hear me out. Michigan has an above-average run defense. They have a very good run defense. It is not an elite run defense. It is not as good as their pass defense is. And even in the front seven, they are a much better pass-rushing front seven than they are a run-stopping front seven. And you can see this. If you look at the statistics, they're ranked in the mid-20s on almost every rush defensive category. They allow 122 rushing yards a game, which is a good number, but it's not a great number, especially Georgia averages 81, I think, 82. So 40 yards more than Georgia allows. They allow about 85% of their opponent's averages, which is more of an advanced metric, if you will. Really, all it is like if your opponent averages this many rushing yards per game before they play you, how many of that number that they average do you allow? So Michigan allows teams to get about 85% of what they normally do on the ground, which is a pretty good average number for a Power 5, high-level football team. For comparison's sake, though, I think Georgia averages like 55% or 58% of opponents' rushing averages allowed. And so that's where you can really start to see the discrepancy there. Michigan has a good rush defense, but it is not like an elite level. And when you're facing a team like Georgia, who has 4 or really even more, depending on how far you want to go down the roster, but has 4 or more high-level running backs, a very good run-blocking offensive line. They're much better at run blocking than pass blocking. And to me, most importantly and somewhat slept on, is that they have 3 tight ends who are all very, very frequently and very creatively used in the run game as far as blocking goes. You have a guy like a Darnell Washington who's 6'8" and 270 pounds. He's basically a 6th offensive lineman out there. You could argue he's the best blocker on the team when it comes to run blocking. He's also a passing threat. He caught a touchdown against Alabama. Brock Bowers is a very good blocker. You have a guy like a John Fitzpatrick who's like a 6'7", 260 guy at tight end. Outstanding blockers at tight end. And Georgia will very frequently run these 3 tight ends and throw to them and pass out of those sets. And they will also very frequently run the exact same formation, the exact same set, and run out of it and run behind these tight ends. And that has really helped the Georgia run game because it gives you almost extra offensive linemen out there. And when you have tight ends that are as big as Georgia has, it's a real matchup problem, and I think it can really help the Georgia run game. They have a very good rushing offense of their own. They have all season. They always do. And they are very much going to be committed to running the football all game long. Even if Michigan stops it early and it struggles, Georgia's not going to go away from the run unless Michigan is just pulling away on the scoreboard. And if you look at the Alabama game where I think some Michigan fans will probably go sort of detract from Georgia, the Alabama team, they have an elite level run defense. Now, their defense has been kind of maligned a little bit this year, and I think somewhat wrongly, but all of that is on the secondary. Their rushing defense averages less yards per carry than Georgia's does. I mean, they are an outstanding run defense. I think they're at the very least top 5 in rushing defense just based off the overall statistics. I think in practice they're actually better than that because you have a team like a San Diego State who's ahead of everybody. And come on, we all know that they're not the same level run defense as in Alabama. But that's not really, it's not talking about Alabama, but that run defense that they put out against Georgia, you can't expect Michigan to replicate that. Michigan hasn't been as good as them in run defense all year. Also, Alabama jumped out to a lead, and I say Georgia had the lead early, but Bama went on, I think, a 4 or 5 possession run where they scored 4 or 5 times in a row. Georgia had stalled out a few times. All of a sudden, the run game's basically gone because now you're down by 2-3 scores, and your defense has been struggling. I don't see Michigan jumping out to that kind of a lead, which I'll get into later when we break down the offense-defense. I also just don't think Michigan's rush defense is nearly as good as Alabama's rush defense. And again, not a slight at the Michigan run defense. It's not going to be like a liability or anything, but I expect Georgia to run for probably 4 or 5 yards a carry, maybe 6 yards a carry if they have a really, really good rushing game, but I'm thinking probably around the 4.5 yards per carry mark, which is effective. You know, it keeps them on schedule. It's not going to dominate the game. They're not just going to run down Michigan's throat or anything, but it's a very effective rushing offense that keeps you on schedule, that opens up the passing game. You're looking good if you can average 4 or 5 yards a carry. And as far as the Georgia offense is concerned, there are a lot of question marks and uncertainties right now, but run game's not going to be one of them. Now, moving on to some of those question marks and uncertainties, there's obviously the quarterback situation. I just don't think it really is going to change much for the team either way, though. So nobody knows who's going to start. I think it's going to be Stetson Bennett. All indications are that it's probably going to be Stetson Bennett. JT Daniels, especially because we think he had COVID. I'm not positive. But he definitely missed a few practices last week and probably some this week as well. And so it makes it really hard for you to start a guy who has been the backup, who didn't get to practice as much as the original starter did. It makes it very unlikely. But I have heard some things about JT Daniels getting the start. And, I don't know. I have no idea who's going to start. I personally feel that JT Daniels makes Georgia a better team than Stetson Bennett does. It allows them to, if the run game gets stalled, they get forced in a situation where they absolutely have to pass, then they can with JT Daniels. You can pass better with him than you can with Stetson Bennett. But if Georgia is in a position where they are being forced to pass and they can't run the ball, then the game is already not going their way to begin with. Something has gone awry. They're probably not going to be in a position to win that game most of the time, regardless of who's at quarterback for them, if it's JT Daniels or Stetson Bennett. So I do expect Georgia to come out early throwing the ball just to try to keep Michigan off balance. Probably going to keep it safe, throw short to mid, using running backs, tight ends pretty heavily. But the main focus of the offense is going to be establishing the run game early on, which is largely going to determine the success of the offense, in my opinion. Georgia has a very good offensive line, particularly in the run game, as I said, which is helped tremendously by the clever use of the tight ends. And I expect them to win the line of scrimmage in the running game, but not dominantly. Like I said, they're not just going to run down Michigan's throat. I would expect 4 to 5 yards per carry, which will be enough to keep the offense on schedule, keep them alive. I also think the offensive line will be able to limit Michigan's pass rush to some extent when coupled with how like they're going to dominate, but with how good they're going to be able to run the ball. Being able to stay effective in the run game really helps counteract a pass rush. And Georgia's offensive line is a good offensive line. They're a very good offensive line. I think Michigan will probably get a couple sacks. They will get some pressure on whoever is playing quarterback for Georgia. But I don't think it's going to be able to just completely dominate the game. If Georgia gets in a situation where they can't run the ball and they have to pass out of necessity, they're forced to pass versus being able to pass just when they want to, then you can start to see things snowball in a really bad way for Georgia, where Michigan gets obvious passing situations so they get a better pass rush. Georgia's not a great passing team, especially when forced to pass. You could stall out a few times. Michigan gains momentum. Very quick snowball there that could lead to some serious issues if Georgia can't get the run game going. Georgia establishing the run is the entire key to this side of the matchup. I think they're going to be able to do it with enough effectiveness to keep the passing game viable as well. And I think that'll be enough to keep Georgia's offense as a whole pretty decent and on schedule, though not dominant by any means. But overall, the biggest matchup to watch on this side of the ball is just the line of scrimmage entirely. Can Michigan control the line of scrimmage and limit Georgia's run game, which will then therefore handicap their passing game and severely limit their capabilities on offense? Or will Georgia be able to establish the run, limit the pass rush some, and get the passing game going, maybe even hit a few explosives, but mainly just stay on schedule? If Georgia gets behind the sticks, the offense begins to fall apart a little bit. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle of those two scenarios, but I would give a slight edge to Georgia. Like I said, I think they're going to win the line of scrimmage, particularly in the run game, but they're not going to dominate it, and it's not going to say that Michigan's not going to cause Georgia to stall out on a few drives, because they definitely will. Georgia's not going to score every time they get the ball or anything like that. I just think Georgia's offense is going to be good enough to stay afloat, keep them in the game, and do enough for them going forward. And now let's move on to the other side of the ball, the Michigan offense against the Georgia defense. So, Michigan runs a almost 3-to-2 run-to-pass ratio, which is about as severe as you're going to find in modern college football. Indicates they're a very, very heavy run team. If you know anything about Michigan, you already know this. But this doesn't mean that they have a bad passing offense by any means. They have a good but not great wide receiver core, and they employ two quarterbacks who have both been pretty effective when they've played. J.J. McCarthy has the higher ceiling, both with his arm and his legs, but he also makes way too many mistakes to consistently rely upon him as the starter. That's the reason McNamara has been and will continue to be the starter going forward. And in this game in particular, I don't think McCarthy's going to be a huge factor because his legs are what sort of separates him from McNamara at this point. And Georgia's defense is insanely fast. At every position group, they are absolutely ridiculously fast. And I don't think that McCarthy is a good enough runner to really make Georgia scheme around him, especially because he doesn't start. And so, yes, he's going to play, and especially in short yardage situations where putting him in the game gives you another option in like an RPO or just a normal read option even. But overall, I don't expect him to have a drastic impact on this game, although he will definitely play. He always does. But McNamara is going to be the guy. You know, he's a little bit more limited in pure talent, but he's the much better decision maker. He is certainly the better fit to be a starter for this team. He averages right around 23 pass attempts per game this year. And I have also noticed that in your bigger games this season, he tends to be closer to 20 attempts per game. I'm pretty sure the Ohio State game, for example, he had 19 attempts. Now, that's a game where they were obviously running the ball very well, but I think that's what Michigan wants to do. They want to keep him 25 attempts or less, especially in big games. The closer to 20 you can keep him, the better. To me, it shows Michigan's not comfortable asking him to throw the ball 30 times a game or more, particularly in a big game against a very good defense like Georgia has. And this is very similar to the Georgia offense, where they can pass out of luxury, they can pass when they want to, and they're very, very effective. But if forced to consistently throw the ball, forced to where they can't run and they have to pass all the time, I could see Michigan's passing game dropping off very quickly. They haven't really been put in that kind of a situation yet this year. But if they were to be put in a situation where their run game doesn't just carry the day, I think it's safe to assume Michigan will struggle offensively with the passing game. Not that it'll just fall off a cliff or anything, but it just won't, it won't be as effective as you're used to seeing from them. And with that being said, I think it's important to note that the Georgia front seven is going to be the best Michigan has seen to date. And yes, the Michigan offensive line is outstanding. It is a very good, you could even argue the best offensive line in the nation. The Georgia front seven, you could say the exact same thing about on the other side of the ball. I mean, as good as they are, they will likely get some pressure on the quarterback, probably get a couple sacks in the game. I don't expect them to just do what they did to Clemson, where they got 7 or 8 sacks. They're not going to do that, but 2 or 3 sacks, get some pressure on the quarterback for sure. But I think what you're really going to see from the Georgia front seven is that they can control the line of scrimmage in the run game. But stick to the pass game for now. What we saw against Alabama was the Georgia corners getting exposed a little bit. but most of that was Bryce Young and Jamison Williams. Georgia was uncharacteristically not able to generate any pass rush. They got no sacks. Jamison Williams and John Mechie were both absolutely outstanding. Bryce Young had the game of his life. And while I respect the Michigan passing game, their quarterbacks, their wide receivers, they simply are not the equivalent of Alabama in this instance. I think they will be effective in the passing game. They're not going to dice up the secondary like Alabama did, though. They can't. I don't think that they should be able to expect to just come out and throw the ball all over the yard and dominate the game through the air. Just seems unlikely. Which to me brings us to the most important thing for this side of the ball as well, which is just the line of scrimmage in the run game. And I hinted at earlier, I think Georgia's defense is going to hold up pretty well here. The Georgia defense is literally one of the best run defenses that we've seen in decades. And it's not just the names that you guys might know, like the Jordan Davises. It's a guy like a Devontae Wyatt, a Jalen Carter, Trayvon Walker, Nakobe Dean, Channing Tindall, Quay Walker, Nolan Smith, and more beyond that too. All of those guys are going to be drafted either this year or next year, and they are the reason that Georgia has only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all season. They allow 2.6 yards per carry and just 82 rushing yards a game. And now I'm not saying Michigan won't be able to run on Georgia, because that's just disregarding how great Michigan has been all year, particularly in the run game. It would be dumb to do that. But if you expect Michigan to come in, run for over 200 yards and like 4 or 5 touchdowns, I think you're probably going to be disappointed in how this game turns out. I would expect Michigan to run for somewhere between 100, 150 yards and a touchdown or 2. And I could always be wrong about that, but I would be severely shocked if Michigan just comes out, physically dominates the line of scrimmage on offense, and runs up and down the field on Georgia. It would be the first time anybody has ever come anywhere close to doing that. Alabama didn't run the ball well, and they had their own set of issues going into that game, but nobody all season has run the ball with hardly any effectiveness against Georgia. While Michigan will be the best run offense they faced, I think it's just kind of crazy to assume they're going to go for over 200 and a bunch of touchdowns. And again, before you guys say that I'm being disrespectful to the Michigan run offense, because I know people are going to say that, 2 rushing touchdowns and 150 rushing yards would literally double what Georgia allows on average, which is crazy to think about, but Georgia has allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all season. So 2 in one game is absolutely, that's ridiculous comparative to how well Georgia's defense has played. And I think that it's very likely Michigan could get 2 rushing touchdowns and 150 rushing yards. My point is, I'm giving Michigan credit. I am giving Michigan credit for how good their run game is. It's just how outstanding Georgia's run defense has been as well. I feel like you also have to give them the same credit, which is where I get this, 100, 150 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns number at. So I don't expect Michigan to just come out and run the ball down their throat. I do expect them to be effective in the run game, though. So overall, if you combine what will be a decently efficient Michigan run game, in my opinion, with an effective passing game that's good but not anything crazy, not Alabama level, I see the Michigan offense doing okay as a whole. I think they're likely going to lose the yardage battle with Georgia by a decent margin. But again, in Michigan's favor here is that they are, Georgia's going to struggle to manufacture points out of the yards, and Michigan's offense is great at manufacturing points, even if they don't win the yardage discrepancy. They lead the nation in explosive plays over 50, 60, and 70 yards. That's a great way to lose the yardage battle and win the scoring battle, which is what actually matters. They've been very good this season at converting yards into points. They have the best kicker in America. And so while I feel that Georgia will be more effective on average, and like I said, win the yardage war, that doesn't mean that they're going to win the game, because Michigan is going to be better at scoring more points with fewer yards, while Georgia does the exact opposite. So overall, with that, I feel like the Georgia defense is going to win the war up front at the line of scrimmage, but they're not just going to have their way with Michigan either. Michigan has an outstanding offensive line in their own right. Georgia's pass rush is going to be noticeable, but it's not going to take over the game, very similar to how I feel like Michigan's pass rush will do against Georgia's offensive line. I feel that Michigan's running offense will be very effective, but it's not going to be, as dominant as it has been all year. I think it's pretty fair to assume that based on how good Georgia's rushing defense has been all year. I think the Michigan pass offense will be effective. They'll probably hit some big explosives that could turn the tide of the game. But as far as consistent every down type stuff, I think they're going to have some yardage struggles. I think they're going to stall out a few times, and I think they're going to struggle a little bit. Not mightily or anything. They're going to be effective. It's not like Georgia's going to go shut them out or anything crazy like that. But I think the Michigan's going to be forced to rely a little bit more on their passing game than they want to, and they're going to have to hit those explosives if they want to, score the amount of points that they're going to need to win this game. Similar to Georgia's offense, also, if they get behind the sticks a lot and put into obvious passing situations, they're gonna get into a mess really quick. That goes for both teams. They're both very similar here. Now, real quick, as far as special teams is concerned, I feel that the return games are incredibly finicky. They're hard to rely on consistently. Both teams have been good in their return games this year. So as far as using it to predict a game, I just kind of consider that a wash. But Michigan definitely has an edge at kicker. As I said earlier, they have the best kicker in America. Georgia kicking game is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not, Michigan has the best kicker in America, Georgia doesn't. So, yes, their kicking game is good, but Michigan has an edge there. But the opposite is true with the punters. Georgia's punter, Jake Camarda, is an NFL-level punter. He's been outstanding all season. Michigan's punter is also good, but slight edge to Georgia in punting, slight edge to Michigan in kicking. Overall, I generally just kind of treat everybody's special teams as a wash, but when I looked more into it, Michigan is ranked as one of, if not the top overall special teams units in college football this year. So I do feel special teams are often pretty inconsistent and hard to predict games on, but I will give Michigan an edge in special teams just because they have been on average all year a little bit better than Georgia in the special teams department. But I don't think it's going to be too much of a factor in this game, unless somebody just returns a punt for a touchdown or blocks a punt or something crazy, which, again, you can't really count on in a prediction type video. Which brings me to my conclusion. So, as a whole, I feel that these two teams are very evenly matched, and I wouldn't be surprised if either team won this game. The only thing that would surprise me is a blowout by either team. I don't think either team is going to come out here and blow the other one out. It doesn't seem likely to me. They're way too similar. They're way too evenly matched, and they're both pretty defensive, run-the-ball kind of offenses who rely on elite defenses, and those don't tend to lend themselves to blowouts anyway. I would expect the Georgia run game to basically be just as effective as the Michigan running game in this matchup, because while the Michigan running offense is better than the Georgia running offense, the Georgia running defense is better than the Michigan running defense, and so it balances out that way. I think they're going to be very comparable in the run games. I feel very similar about the passing games. I think that's largely going to depend on each team's ability to run the ball. I think, like I said earlier, I think the running games are going to be similar. I would have to give a slight edge to Georgia there just because I don't think Michigan's run defense is quite as good as everybody seems to think. But, again, very close. Passing games are also similarly going to be very close. If I had to give an edge, I would say on consistency, the edge would go to Georgia. I think they're going to be more effective every down. But Michigan is going to be way better at hitting a big play. And so I think those are also very evenly matched. Overall, I think the Georgia offense will be just slightly more effective than the Michigan offense on average. Like I said, Michigan will probably hit more explosives and be more efficient, so even though they're going to lose the yardage battle, in my opinion, they will likely be able to keep the game very close because of their efficiency in scoring points and their ability to hit big explosive plays. So, with everything that I have said, let me go ahead and give my final score prediction. And I'm going to take Georgia 27, Michigan 21, and I just think that the Georgia defense matches up with the Michigan offense too well to expect Michigan to score much more than 21. Now, they could get to 24, 28, or even maybe 31, although I would expect more in the 20s. Unless they get help in the form of turnovers, either way this game goes, if either team turns the ball over and loses the turnover battle, that can make a huge difference in a game that's this evenly matched. But again, turnovers, kind of similar to special teams. You can't really count on them in a predictive type video. So I'm just kind of assuming turnover battle goes equal. As for Georgia getting to 27, I think that the run game will be good enough to keep them on schedule more often than not, and that they're going to do enough in the passing game to score effectively. And I feel like they're going to have a pretty noticeable yardage advantage because of this. And I think I don't necessarily think that Georgia in a vacuum is a better team than Michigan in a vacuum. It's just that what Georgia's defense does great is what Michigan's offense does good versus what Michigan's defense does great, stopping the pass, isn't what Georgia's offense does. Georgia is a run offense. That's what Michigan's defense struggles, air quotes, because they don't struggle, but that's their weakness, if there is one, on their defense, versus the opposite. I think the matchup just favors Georgia as to how the teams play out. But I could very easily see Michigan winning. Like I said, I have it a very close game. I think it's going to be a little bit closer than the spread. And with Michigan's ability to hit explosive plays, the game could easily go either way. But with all that being said, this is just my opinion, and this game could, like I said, easily go either way. So let me know what you guys think about this matchup down below in the comment section. Also, if you enjoyed the video and you've made it this far, go ahead and leave a like on the video, because you've made it this far. You might as well at this point. Also, subscribe to the channel for more college football content like this in the future, as I will consistently be putting out college football content here on the channel going forward. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.